Somewhere under this grass is a Roman cemetery containing the remains of soldiers from all over the empire who were stationed here in South Shields. We know it's here because Victorian builders found loads of bodies. The fort was in use for 300 years, so the cemetery could be huge. And it's not just full of your average Roman squaddies. There were troops from Spain and Africa. There's even an intriguing reference to what could be a unit of Iraqis. There's just one tiny problem. The whole thing is under a housing estate. And we've got just 3 days to try and crack it.
Well, what we're seeing is mainly all the Victorian houses. We think there were two street lines here, one at the front and one at the back.
Running
parallel with the road, yeah. And we think in the middle of the trench we may be into the yard.
So that's houses, courtyard houses.
That's right.
Yeah.
But this is all disturbing our results. It's only when we go to the radar. This is the disturbance, the Victorian rubble. But you can see these responses below. What we wonder is whether that's the archaeology, and that's what we want to see.
Could it just be the deep foundations of the houses?
It could be the deep foundations of the houses. And the only way we'll find out is by digging.
The Victorian builders are a tough act to follow. They found some amazing stuff. Like this. Right in the middle of our site, they unearthed two of the finest Roman tombstones in Britain. Roman South Shields was clearly a microcosm of the whole empire. This test pit will be here in the middle of the estate. Others will be in an arc running up to Trench 2, which is being dug to look for the northern boundary of the cemetery. But the first indications aren't hopeful. Phil's come down onto concrete where we might have expected the demolition rubble of Victorian houses. And Bridget's bogged down in modern services, gas, water and electricity pipes. The population of the vicus and the fort might have been more than 1,000. During the 300-odd years of the fort's life, thousands of people would have died in Arbea. They must have been buried somewhere. Stuart's trying to work out whether the shape of the landscape in Roman times offers any clues as to where the cemetery might have been. Bridget in Trench 1 has found a way through the services.
Have you found any Roman features?
Well, no, not yet. We just seem to be going through this Victorian makeup layer debris. But then Ray's been up here and he has found 3 bits of medieval pots. We've got the green glaze.
Oh, yeah, that's good, isn't it? Amazing.
So Bridget's got another 1,400 years to go if she's going to find the western boundary of the cemetery. Phil, though, in Trench 2, can't get any deeper. 12 years of time, team, tells me that this isn't Roman, Phil.
No, I don't think I've ever found a vehicle inspection pit before, Tony. I'm blaming him. You know, when we put this trench in, I was expecting the foundations of a Victorian terrace.
We actually got something, Bridge.
Well, yeah, we have. It's the first feature in this trench. It's this irregular shaped cut here. It's cutting through this windswept redeposited sand, and inside it we've got bands, distinct bands of clay and then dirty sand and then clay and then dirty sand again.
Do you reckon that's something created by humans?
It looks like it to me. If you look at that nice vertical edge there, the sharpness of the cut, it looks like an intrusion that's been deliberately dug. This could be a Roman feature.
Roman grave?
I'm not really sure. It has the feel to me in a sort of sand subsoil like this, perhaps a natural feature. You know, with heavy rain leading to hollows forming, clay in the bottom of the hollows as it dries out, windblown sand, more clay.
So what are we going to do with it?
Well, I think we need to get to the bottom of it. One of the problems is, though, what we'll find, because in sand...
Well, exactly, but I don't think we're going to find much evidence of any bone left within the sand, because it just disappears pretty quickly.
Does that mean that we can't prove whether it's a grave or not?
Oh, no, because in a Roman grave, especially in a military cemetery, you would expect to get grave goods. So even with no preservation of bone, it is possible to prove a Roman grave.
Here you go, Phil.
In Trench 4, there's already a strong sniff of Roman in the finds.
It's quite a nice bold rim, really.
Yeah, it's been knocked around a bit, hasn't it?
But that's the last piece of archaeology Matt Williams will see for 24 hours. Instead of evidence of dead people, we're getting traces of occupation where people lived.
Ah, well, it's obvious that's Gaulish Samian ware, imported from Roman Gaul. And I can tell straight away this is a very rare form. You know those mortaria, those Roman kitchen mixing bowls?
With the grits inside.
That's right, for grinding up the food. Very characteristic of Roman cooking. This is a very rare Samian form of mortarium. It's got a kind of vertical wall round the edge here with a very characteristic little lion's head spout on one side, and then the bowl down here with the grits. You can actually see some of the grit there. It's not the sort of thing I'd expect to find in a grave, though. I think that's occupational debris.
With the vicus appearing to stretch further south than previously thought, the Roman map of South Shields is being redrawn.
Phil, I can't believe this. You only had a couple of pieces before lunch.
In Trench 4, Phil's flow of finds has turned into a flood. But the story is still settlement, not cemetery.
I mean, look at this. We got this loads of Samian. That's probably my favourite. It's nicely decorated.
Actually, it's not that wonderful, you know. If you look at the rosettes, they're very worn down, and it's got that rather smudgy orange colour. I think this is East Gaulish, you know, late 2nd century, early 3rd century. It's come across from the Rhineland.
Well, they're notable for their crappy Samian.
Well, actually, they weren't very good at it, and it's not that. It's quite distinctive, actually, but it's a good date, though.
And then we've also got these colour-coated, which I love that sort of decoration.
Yeah, that's one of those little beer drinking beakers.
Beer drinking?
That's right.
I approve of that, yeah.
But this one, I think, has come from the Nene Valley, Cambridgeshire, near Peterborough,
Right.
that sort of area.
And then we've got more roulette in as well.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. That colour makes me think this is from North Gaul.
Yeah?
So quite, yeah. You know, what's really interesting about that is it sort of shows all the trade routes that have gone up here. I mean, we know the place was a port, don't we? So a lot of this stuff would have been shipped in up the East Coast or across the North Sea.
Among the finds turned up by Victorian builders were a number of skulls, all of which show signs of trauma. That's wounds to you and me. Even a supply base like Arbea would have seen its share of frontline action, and the actual wounds have been intriguing our bones experts.
We've got these skulls, and a lot of them have got cut marks on like these. You can see caused by a very sharp blade, and another one there, and another one there. These are obviously inflicted when this poor bloke was down on his knees, probably, by somebody who was in a bit of a frenzy of killing. And there's a lot of evidence of that. But this one's probably the most unusual one of all, because you've got this depressed fracture where the bone is still attached on the inside, and you've got the signature of the weapon that actually caused that here. So we're experimenting to see if we can actually establish what type of weapon caused that signature.
It's not clear whether the wounds were inflicted on Romans or by Romans.
You can see what it's done. You can see that it's crushed the bone there, and then there's a fracture leading up here. So we are starting to get these radiating fractures coming out, but it still doesn't look like that, does it, Margaret?
It doesn't, no. My money's on this, Tony. I think the only thing that's the right sort of size with enough velocity to cause this sort of damage is something like shot or a stone even that would have actually impacted like that.
Slingshots were used by both local Britons and the Romans.
That does look pretty plausible.
It does, it's quite convincing, I think.
At last, one of our test pits is delivering Roman finds. The question is, could they be from burials?
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes. Right, that's from a nice little piece of flagon. There's the main body, and then that's up to the rim. Unfortunately, without the handle or the proper rim, it's going to be very hard to date that, but that's guaranteed Roman period. Now, a flagon is the sort of thing you could get in a cremation burial as a grave good, but it's more likely that this is just a normal flagon from everyday use, part of everyday life in the vicus, really.
Trench 4 is becoming our hot trench. Not the roadside burials that Stuart expected, but instead signs of settlement in the form of a midden or rubbish dump. And now it's thrown up another surprise.
Nick, would you care to have a look at this? Incredibly compact, hard surface.
Wow, that is hard, isn't it? That's real metalling.
I mean, is this the sort of surface that you get from your Roman roads up here?
Yes, it looks Roman to me, given the amount of Roman material we've had off the top of it.
Oh, it's there. It's there. It's there. There it is. Oh, God, it's still going.
A Roman road, another sign of life where we expected to find death. It's becoming a real puzzle trying to work out what happened to all those people who must have died at Arbea. Were they all in one cemetery? Carenza's trying to find out whether the layout of other Roman fort sites can tell us why the cemetery here is so elusive. The answer may be both simple and devastating.
The problem is that the cemetery may well be a lot smaller and a lot more compact, and perhaps several cemeteries. What we may be hitting is the gaps in between. I think what we really need to do from the archaeological point of view is start as close as possible to any spot where we know we've had human remains in the ground.
But that's the exact opposite of what Tim told us the strategy was at the beginning. He said to start wide out and work in.
And it hasn't worked.
2 new trenches are planned. The first close to an earlier excavation which found part of a Roman burial. 20 metres away, geophys are surveying our second target. A previous test pit here found part of a curving ditch which could have ringed a Roman barrow burial. We want to find out if it did. The only problem is we know that the area is packed with gas, water and electricity service pipes. It's now nearly lunchtime. Talk about last orders at the Last Chance Saloon. Anything in here?
Well, there would have been, but unfortunately, we've got Service City here. I mean, old Victorian services, some of which we couldn't have picked up.
Damn.
So
And nothing else?
Nothing else, I'm afraid, no.
What about over here?
Well, down here, where we had highest hopes of finding a burial, more services.
So what are we going to do?
We've got one chance, I think. This is the geophysics we've now extended. They're the trenches. Look at that, that stands out like a sore thumb. We can't ignore that. It might only be more Victorian cellars, but given the circumstances, we've got to go for it.
Perhaps it is one option and it's just down here, but I haven't given up over here.
We've still got lots of services, though.
Well, there are services, but there's a gap. Just up here, right on the edge of the site.
What, from the edge of this pavement down to this orange line? Tim, that is an act of desperation.
Absolutely not. We've got this trench we're going to put in here, and we're going to go down there.
Where the pegs are, we've marked it out.
Well, we'll have dug up the whole estate then, won't we?
Pretty much, but that's the way it goes.
Flipping heck. So 2 new trenches are going in. One to investigate John's anomaly, and the other as close to point H as we can get. But it feels like desperation. We're no longer looking for a cemetery, we're looking for a single grave. And our best bet may still be the possible barrow burial in Trench 7, even though it's been damaged by services. Tim, I remember the night before we started. There you were, first time that you'd run a time team dig. And what you were worried about was how we were going to process this wealth of archaeology which was going to gush up out of the earth as soon as you put a trench in.
Yep, and it's been rather different, hasn't it?
Why?
I think it's because the land surface we see now is very different from the Roman underlying surface, and we didn't realise how variable the geology was. You know, sand this deep in one place, clay in natural hollows, gullies and things that we didn't imagine were going to be there at all.
But this is quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is, because in fact the archaeology in here, although it's not symmetry, I think is beginning to make me feel we can tie it all together.
In what way?
Well, underneath that midden, you know, the rubbish deposit that Phil found yesterday, we discovered a cobbled path, which I think Phil's glorified with the name of a road. It's not what you'd call Grade 1 standard major Roman roads, but it's still a path, and it's on this particular alignment leading down towards the known burials. And that makes me excited, because I think we're getting the idea of a path leading towards the burials.
Why do you say you're beginning to be able to tie everything together?
Well, because we found these same cobbles in the next trench down, even closer to the cemetery.
Bridget's Trench?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this pathway thing is heading through that trench and on to Carenza's glorious Point H?
Absolutely, that's what we think, yeah. And what's more, we've discovered something new in the last half an hour, which I think makes that idea even more positive.
Tell me.
Well, you can see the road, or rather what's left of it, down here. But we've just discovered a ditch on the same alignment towards the far side, running through the yellow sand, that grey band. The previous excavation that did find burials was defined by ditches. on exactly this alignment. And I think we found the edge of their cemetery plot.
Which is what we came to look for, wasn't it? The definition of the cemetery.
Absolutely.
But it would be nice to find a burial, wouldn't it?
There's just a chance that we may have found something.
What?
Well, over in the section of the trench there, Bridge, I think, thinks she may have found something cut in the ditch that looks a bit like a burial.
Do you think you might actually have a grave cut?
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. Look, you can see it. Clay inside, quite a square-looking feature. And on this site, there has been Roman graves found cut into gullies before.
Well, that's the most optimistic thing I've heard for several hours. A grave would be fantastic news. And there's more good news from the children of the local junior school, who've produced an impressive haul of finds from their test pits.
They've actually found a lot of Roman pottery, considering what a small area has been opened up.
They've done very well indeed, they really have.
Can you give them an idea of what was going on in the Roman period on this spot from what they found?
Well, I can see straight away there's a really nice little collection of Roman kitchenware. This is the kind of material that was used every day in a Roman kitchen. It would pick up contaminants from the food and they'd throw it away on a fairly regular basis, much as we would throw away paper plates, polystyrene containers, that sort of thing. This is the kind of material that would have been used in the houses in the Vicus, where the families of the soldiers who lived in the fort were having their ordinary everyday lives.
But where were the beggars buried? Not here. John's anomaly has turned out to be a dump of bricks. Possibly here, next to point H. But because of the services, we'll never know.
Is it another one of those services?
There's a big void in here, look.
Even more disappointingly, Bridget's possible grave cut has turned out to be a natural feature, though the trench has produced a fine Samian sherd.
It's a really nice piece. Got a stag there, all these decorative features, mass-produced by one of the huge factories in central Gaul, central France, shipped into Britain by the ton.
Sort of what date are we talking?
Round about the middle of the 2nd century, so about the time that the stone fort was built.
We have got one big bit of bone, which is in that tray there.
Where did this come from?
It's from a level which is much nearer the level of the road surface, just about this sort of height in the section.
Oh, that black stuff, or...?
No, just below that. Just
Oh,
below
right,
that.
OK.
Well, is it human?
I think it probably
Human?
is.
Which bit of the body?
It looks like a chunk of upper arm from quite a chunky arm as well.
But to be sure...
The possible cremation pit turned out to be a prehistoric feature, but the human bone shows there was a burial nearby. 20 metres away, Bridget's Trench has also finally produced intriguing evidence that we are close to the cemetery. Ditches on the right alignment, and now, what could be even more positive, bone.
The question is, what sort of bone? It's in such awful condition. It's certainly not cremated bone. I mean, it's mostly from long bones, but my goodness, it's the consistency of toothpaste.
Yeah, it's just rotten, it's falling apart.
This is obviously why we're not recovering any skeletons here, isn't it? This soil's so acidic that bone's just decaying.
Whether or not it's human, we now know that we're close to the cemetery, or one of them. It was small and couldn't have held all of our Bayers dead, so there must have been other cemeteries. This one was prominently placed crowning a hill with access along Phil's track. We now also know that the Vicus stretched further down than previously thought, forming the northern boundary. The main road south from the fort was the eastern limit. To the south, there was marshy ground unsuitable for burials.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
See this? That is 10 Roman coins. If I found these all together in the ground, they'd officially constitute an archaeological hoard. So imagine finding this many coins. 55,000 to be precise. This is the single largest site we've ever attempted to investigate. And as usual, in Trestiabus nobis cognoscendum est. It's a fantastic notion, this idea that underneath this field is an entire Roman town. But when I look at it, all I can see is the sweep of the stubble. I can't see any lumps and bumps or anything.
Yeah, it doesn't look like much, does it really, Tony? But actually, this is the site of a Roman town called Cunetio. But its site was lost for almost 2,000 years until aerial photographs in the 1940s showed unmistakable parch marks. Ditches, big stone wall, Roman buildings, Roman street.
So Trench 1 is going in across a break in the southern wall, where the team suspects we might find the gateway and a watchtower.
There's our first Roman find. I'd say that's a piece of Roman pot.
Yeah, without doubt, that's from Dorset. So yeah, that's probably going to be later Roman.
I did want an address for it.
Despite centuries of destructive ploughing on this field, geophys are producing cracking results, and that's reflected in the archaeology. Phil, how are we getting on?
Superbly, Tony. Just as on the geophysics, we've got the wall here, it ends about here, and then I think we're going into the ditch. It's much darker through there, and it gets chalky around there, and at the back, round the corner, we've got this big black blob with pottery, and we've got bone on it. I think that's our pit. And apart from that, we've got other bits of pottery, we've got coins. It really is all coming together.
So already it looks as though our Roman town is beginning to appear in the field. How much more is there? We'll find out later. Oh, and of course, this being time team, it looks like it's going to bucket down any minute. John, what is that contraption?
This is Jimmy in the future. We've got such a big site here. The only way we decided we could tackle it was to try this new bit of kit that the Swedish have developed. And basically, it's radar on wheels.
Jimmy, is this usually used on archaeological sites?
No, this has been designed with utility mapping in mind, so looking for pipes and cables. Hasn't actually been used on archaeology in Britain before.
Well, that's quite exciting.
It really is a first, and it is absolutely amazing.
And as the predicted rain starts to fall, Trench 1 gives us our first classy find.
Ah, yeah. It's a spoon. Yeah, that's the handle. You've got the little drop, and then you've got just part of the bowl. Would have been a circular one, and they tend to be earlier rather than late Romans. They're more likely 2nd century, early 3rd.
These types of spoon were usually silvered or tin-plated, and were a cut above the regular day-to-day wooden variety. And equally lavish objects were unearthed here during the 50s and 60s. Unfortunately, the excavation notes were never published, but the amazing finds did make it to a local museum.
David, one of the problems we've got on this site is a small amount of digging that has taken place as they've been written up, but you've got all the finds in the museum.
That's right, and you see them all here. Here is a piece of stone from an arch. It would have sat like that as a column, and the arch for the gateway would have sprung from there. Just shows how monumental the building was. And then, back here, we have some painted wall plaster, and you can see the decoration, the designs on here.
So, do we know where that's from?
I know it's from Trench BB, and I'm not quite sure where that's from. So that's something hopefully you will be able to find out.
So it does suggest that there's a building of high status, presumably with plaster, maybe with a hypercourse, that kind of thing?
Could be.
Back out on site, we've now identified a second target.
We're in the middle of the walled town, and there's this massive building which we think is a mansio.
Oh, that's one of those hotel-type things that high-status people used to stay in when they were wandering around the country.
That's right. Yeah. It's a building made up with a series of rooms, and it's ideal for radar to work on. So we thought this is the best target for us to try. If we look at Mike's computer, we can actually see the results on screen already. I mean, you've seen these time slices before. We've put all the results together, and what we can see are several rooms here, and we think this is part of the mansio. So the plan is to put a trench across one of the walls from inside the room into the courtyard, see if we can get some dating evidence and see the state of preservation.
So our investigation expands from Trench 1, looking for the southern gateway, to Trench 2, which takes in this substantial building in the interior. And the radar results are good. As we're straight down onto the archaeology.
Your work here is done, I think, Ian.
But with Trench 2 looking to ID this building, I'm concerned that we're overly confident it's a mansio.
Well, in the aerial photographs, there is a very clear, large building which has lots of rooms within it arranged around a courtyard. And these you very often find in towns. And so this looks like a mansio. It's in the right kind of place for a mansio. Therefore, it's highly likely to be one.
What do you mean it's in the right place? Do you mean that it's slap bang in the middle of the town inside the walls?
Well, you actually have to imagine that the walls aren't there. Because if they're sort of 4th century, then the mansio was probably built before this. So what I mean is it's right in the centre of where all the roads are coming together, all the major roads are coming together and joining. What you're providing is somewhere for people to eat, somewhere for people to sleep, and somewhere for them to change horses. So you have a whole sequence of bedrooms. Very often, or at least in the earlier stages of them, the bedrooms were of 2 different sizes as to whether you had important officials staying or the common or garden soldier or messenger or postman staying.
If what we have got is a mansio, what does that tell us about this site?
It tells us that it did have a formal function within the Roman imperial system.
If they're right, then Cunetio was built around a Roman travel lodge, with important visitors coming and going on a daily basis.
Is that all coins you got there?
Yep, I've got 13 here.
Where have they come from?
They've come from the spoil heaps just round this trench.
But they've all just come from this trench?
Yep.
I mean, have you got any dates for them?
Well, there's one here that dates to about 270, and that's a coin of Gallienus. But the rest of them really tightly date to the middle of the 4th century, so around 320 to 340 AD.
I mean, I suppose, it's a lovely little collection, but the sheer fact that it's all from the spoil tip, it's all unstratified, it actually only tells us that the Romans were here in Cunetio at that time.
That's true, but the interesting thing here is that 20-year period that the coins come from. And I'm wondering whether perhaps at some point a plough has hit a little coin hoard, perhaps?
Another one?
Yeah, another coin hoard from Cunetio.
See, when you say that, I was thinking this morning, Tony said he had a handful of 10 coins, and he said that constitutes a hoard. You got 13.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is another case of potential treasure.
Wow.
But the weather has caused one major setback. Rain has seeped into the radar machine's computer, forcing it to retreat from sight. Geophys have lost their ultimate weapon. Man will have to triumph where machine has failed. Under the marquee, though, work goes on unhindered. Matt, can I come in your trench?
Yeah, quick, get under the tent.
It's getting worse and worse out there.
It's miserable, isn't it?
I think you're in the best place. This is where we thought there might be a mansio, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we've got it. Over here we've got this lovely packed chalk surface. In the middle, we're just starting to get the stones of this wall coming up, and that goes straight down this way behind me there. On that side, we've got this courtyard area, or yard surface, looks like, and on top of it, in front of Christo there, can you see stone roof tiles slid straight off the roof and landed right there.
So we know we've got a building.
Yeah.
We know it's Roman.
Yeah.
But we don't know it's a mansio, do we?
True, but this fits in perfectly with the geophysics. So I'm pretty sure that we've got it.
So you're happy to continue?
Oh yeah, I'm well up for it.
I'm not surprised, you're the only dry people on the site.
We've clearly got a massive building here. And the problem is there's just so much going on. Unpicking it is just so difficult.
But unpick it we must. So we put another trench in on the strongest anomalies in the building. A mansio would likely have had both a bathhouse and heated rooms. So if we can find them, then we've as good as got our ID. Back over in Trench 1, Phil's confident he's finally found the gateway.
What I've got here is the butt end of the wall that John got on his geophysics. You can see here these flints set into the mortar, where the flints that way are just in loose soil.
The Geophys team, still without their speedy radar on wheels, are putting in the miles and getting the acres done.
That should line up with those defences.
And their survey is gradually adding key features to the rich tapestry of our 3D map. But 20 metres away, on the other side of the Roman courtyard, Matt has at last pinned a date to the mansio.
You know, Matt, the thing about this trench was it had a great plan, didn't it? And it absolutely matched the geophysics like a dream. But we didn't actually have any dating for any of it. But looks like it's changed.
Yeah, indeed. We've just done this tiny little hole up against the wall here. Must be about half a metre by about 30 centimetres. We've got pottery from the floor itself, this chalk floor that I'm kneeling on. We've got pottery from the kind of layer below the chalk floor, and there's another layer below that, and there's pottery coming out of that as well, so there's plenty to choose from.
Well, just a quick inspection, the immediate thing is it's not late Roman. You know, Samian ware is always classically sort of 1st and 2nd century AD. That looks like to be 2nd century. So it does suggest that these floors are being laid around about the 2nd century AD, but there's absolutely no late Roman pottery at all, and nor is there any sort of later floor levels. But it sort of suggests, doesn't it, that this building was built around the 2nd century AD, but perhaps by the time that the stone walls were going up and the fancy house in the far corner was being built, this could be out of use.
Yeah, pretty sure it was.
So before huge walls dominated Canetio, the heart of the town was a mansio with its many bedrooms, stables and bustling kitchen, providing an important staging post on the imperial highway to the west. It was somewhere on the road heading south from that mansio that the massive coin hoard was buried, and Matt seems to be a step closer to finding its location.
Philippa, this has just come out
Wow.
of the ground down there. It was just in the subsoil, kind of churned up, kind of leaning up against the structure here.
Well, it's the earliest coin that we found in the past 3 days, definitely.
Oh.
It's an ass, and it's the Emperor Nero.
So what date is that?
That's 64 to 68 AD.
It's pretty precise. So what we've got here is this oval coming round like that, set into this chalk structure. You can see the chalk blocks coming around there, and it looks to kind of be coming to a point round there.
I must admit, looking at the shape, the way it's emerging, Neil, oven is what springs to mind.
You've got potentially then a sort of oven set inside a building, domestic occupation, and probably earlier rather than later, maybe?
I would have thought so, Neil, up here, yeah. So we're in someone's kitchen.
As Phil heads underground, my questions are on the money. Do you reckon these were buried in panic?
It's a possibility, and that's the traditional interpretation of Roman coin hoards, that they were buried in a time of unrest and then the people would come back and collect them when things had calmed down.
Do you believe that?
Well, it's a possibility, but I think there are lots of other reasons why coin hoards might have been buried.
Like what? Who might have access to this kind of money?
Well, I don't think it's going to be one individual, but money lenders maybe would get this sort of number of coins. Or we could look at this as being a sort of community collection, and that it's been buried for a religious reason and that they've come together to give this all to the gods.
Well, we reckon that's about it.
So, it's not very deep, is it? The room's practically at the surface.
Ah, but you've got to remember, the original Cunetio hoard was roofed over with a slab, and that slab probably was at ground level. So this is probably what it looked like.
What are you excavating right there now?
Well, we've got these layers of demolition that come off either side, so the idea is to put a slot down through these, thinking that, you know, there was a chance that they were going to be covering intact floors. But unfortunately, it looks like this is actually build-up, and the floors would have been higher, so we've lost them.
So it's certainly a very high status building, but we're not going to be able to tell just from this one trench.
No, unfortunately not.
The dating evidence for this substantial building points to activity in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the same date as the stone walls, so it's likely to have played an administrative role over the late town. We've had some really fascinating archaeology from all over the site. We've got the Mansio, we've got the big high-status building that Stuart identified, we've got the building where the hoard originally came from, but we keep being drawn back to this trench for one very good reason. This wall. It's huge, isn't it, Mark? It's monumental.
We knew it was big, but to actually now see it exposed is incredible. I mean, you've got the front face there.
Just here?
Yeah. The rear face is here, and then we've got another big foundation beyond that, probably for a gatehouse. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing.
But when this gatehouse was at its apogee, what would it have looked like?
Well, let's go and stand up where we would have been in the middle of the gate. So we're roughly now standing in the middle of the road. You've got a gate that's at least 5 to 6 metres wide. Then you're going to have a great single arch coming up 4 to 5 metres high. The wall itself's going to be 6 to 8 metres high. We've got the block behind us telling us there's a kind of tower structure, so there's probably another story above that. It's very impressive.
When you first pick one of these things up, it seems pretty light, but the more you hold it, the more you can feel its weight in your biceps. And for me in the small of my back. And yet you guys have been going up and down this field non-stop for 3 days.
Yeah, well, you've just walked about 20 metres.
Yeah.
If you kept going for another 55 kilometres in total, you'd have walked what the team have walked in the past 3 days. I mean, they've collected just short of 500,000 data points and surveyed 27 acres of ground. I mean, it's the biggest survey we've ever done on Time Team.
And the result has been an entire Roman town. Is there anything about it that surprised you or you didn't expect?
There's just so much going on, it's unbelievable. You know, there's the enclosure ditches, the defences, the trackways, the fields, the paddocks, the buildings, a complete plan. And it's coming right through the field, and we've not actually found a limit to the archaeology.
It's quite brilliant. You've actually got 400 years of history on one piece of paper. So our findings suggest that Cunetio began in the 1st century as the Roman army drove a road west. A small settlement grew around a major crossroads, and early in the 2nd century, a mansio developed to cater to passing travellers. Attempts to formalise the town resulted in a gridded street plan, but all that was done away with in the 4th century when town planners slapped down huge walls and cleared the interior, administering the town from the big villa in the corner. All a far cry from the field today. Phil, why do you reckon Cunetio eventually disappeared under the ground, whereas other Roman towns like Cirencester survived?
Well, the way I see it, Tony, probably in the early Romano-British period, you had a perfectly peaceable, prosperous little community thriving here. Everybody going about their local business, minding their own business and getting on perfectly well. And then in the later Roman period, you have the might of bureaucratic, administrative Rome coming here and building this whacking great wall, bringing in their taxation, their administration and all those nasty things. And I reckon that killed the local community. They cluttered off. And then, of course, when the Romans went away, well, the locals didn't want to come back, did they?
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Could this overgrown garden have been one of the most sacred sites in East Anglia? It's a fantastic house. What's it called?
It's called the Priory.
And what's the road called running alongside it?
Priory Road.
Mick, do you think there might be some kind of clue there?
I think it's a bit of a clue, isn't it? There's something going on. We know there was a 12th century Augustinian priory in Blythburgh, so it's somewhere in this area.
You do realise that in order to find out what's going on here, we're really going to have to wallop your garden hard.
Yes, we understand that, but we'd rather that you didn't know before we start the restoration of the formal gardens.
Formal gardens. There's posh.
This is what I call herringbone masonry, because it looks like the bones of a fish. And it's a building style that you see in the Roman period, but you also get it right at the end of the Anglo-Saxon period into the beginning of the Norman period.
So are you saying that this whole building could be either from just before or just after William the Conqueror arrived?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably around about 1100, something like that, but round about that Norman conquest period.
This date is our first clue, as a 12th century Norman priory should follow a basic plan. There should be a great hall, dormitory for the monks to sleep in, and a refectory or dining area forming 3 sides of a cloister. And on the 4th side, there should be a church. And Mick's now confident that's what we have in this garden. So we're putting in a couple of trenches against this wall to test if the cloister is on the southern side of the church. And we're getting lots of broken brick and roof tile. But unfortunately, nothing that immediately screams cloister. But on the other side of the wall, Phil has found foundations that confirm Mick was right about these ruins. This was a church.
Oh, that is cracking stuff. It's the floor of the church. See, it's got this straight edge here. Well, look, that one's broken, but this is a lovely straight edge running across there. So that's just literally, presumably, a panel that goes around the outside. The main floor, they have that up. And you can see here, look, we've actually got the wall of the building here. Look how protected that is. Look, lovely, smooth surface there.
What's the colour about, Phil, then? The black and the yellow kind of? Is it
Some sort of glazing or...?
Yeah, it is. They're glazed touch. So, I mean, if we get a few more of them, I mean, it may well be that we can get them into some sort of maybe checkerboard pattern, so they would have been black and white, yeah.
Oh, wow. You're going to dig that way?
Just try and stop us.
All right.
Hey, what you could do, you own the place.
When we arrived, I just assumed the Priory Church would be no more than a small chapel. But Bob, our buildings expert, believes there's far more to it. This column is now so eroded it looks like something out of Death Valley. But it's actually the remains of a sophisticated piece of architecture.
It really is a column, because if you look high up, you can see there's a change in angle, and there's a slight indent, and it comes in at a higher level. It suggests that we're on a triforium, so that there's probably another layer of arches running off in the other direction, perhaps only for one bay, but nonetheless, it's part of a pier.
What we have is this Price's reference in the 12th century Book of Ely, and it specifically refers to the death and burial at a place called Blythburgh. So we're talking about clearly a very important royal shrine, recognised and almost certainly invested in by Ely for its upkeep and maintenance. And indeed, the founding of the priory may relate to that shrine.
But that's extremely interesting, isn't it? If Anna's bones are still here in the 12th century, they could potentially be here to this day.
That's right. We know he's here somewhere in Blythburgh. And what's going on here in the 12th century? Why does King Henry make this great gesture and encourage this great priory to be founded? Or is it a refoundation of the early royal minster? That's the fascinating possibility. So this could really be one of the great discoveries of all time.
Sam believes there's a chance that when King Henry I founded the priory in Blythburgh, he built it on the site of the earlier Saxon church and its shrine to King Anna or Anna. But unfortunately, we've got to sort out the Norman priory layout first before we can deal with whatever else might be here. And frustratingly, John's now wandered off into next door's garden, determined to find out how far the priory church stretches away to the west. Stuart's sure Blythburgh would have been a sacred or religious refuge for centuries before King Anna died. His burial would almost certainly have attracted pilgrims for hundreds of years after. But would it have been to our sight?
I feel really perplexed about this, John.
Well, it would help if we could work out exactly what we have here. We're certain we have a priory church. The problem is the geophys doesn't really have much evidence for the rest of the priory.
I mean, clearly they're showing something. They're either showing, well, you say walls, there might be robber pits, whatever.
Well, look, they're definitely walls. The resistance there, that's the wall in Faye's Trench.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. So if that's a wall, there's no reason why these shouldn't be walls.
That would leave us with such a small cloister, if that's what's being indicated there, that I just wonder whether either the cloister is on the other side of the church, on the north side of the church over here, or that we're looking for a much more unconventional and irregular plan than we were expecting.
Well, Mick did warn me it wasn't going to be easy. But really, our geophys isn't working for us. And I'm not sure our trenches have told us that much either.
Nothing like an easy sight.
John's got it in one. And behind that calm exterior, I think Mick's really panicking. Why? Well, because none of us can understand this place, and it should be so simple.
If we get rid of that tree there...
We've already got all these trenches open looking for church walls, other buildings and the priory cloisters, but Mick wants more, including one trench in the middle of a hedge.
Hang on, you're in the fence. All the ivy's caught up in the fence.
But there is method in this madness, as Phil's new trench should locate the east end of the church to go with Matt's west end. So, realistically, after a day and a half of digging, we've got a priory church, but no priory. The only thing we've succeeded in is transforming this once elegant garden into something much less picturesque. It's a building site now, let's be honest.
It is a bit now, yeah.
We've got, what, 2 trenches there?
No, 3. There's one down the bottom there as well.
Yeah, all right, 3. We've got one just round the corner there.
And one over the fence in the next garden.
All right, come through here a minute. Come on, we got one there.
Yeah, that's finished, that one.
One round the corner there.
And that's finished.
Little one there.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Oh, doesn't it? Right, we got one here.
That's finished,
over
yeah.
there. It's more like a pick and mix counter than what I think of as an archaeological dig.
I share your worries.
That's fair enough. I can breathe easier now. Careful you don't fall down one of those little holes.
There we are. Quite confident that's a male. That's all we seem to have had so far is evidence for males.
One thing Mick knows is that there should be loads, even hundreds of burials at the foot of these consecrated walls. Which isn't that surprising, given that Blythburgh Priory was lived in for 400 years before Henry VIII dissolved it.
He found them and we all kind of shrieked and, oh, Daddy, Daddy!
And as Susan and her family found out, their remains can turn up in the most unexpected places.
We've got 3 different skulls.
Have you got enough to know whether they might be male or female?
Well, this one here is definitely male because you've got this enormous nuchal crest sticking out here.
Where is
that's the bit right at the back of the skull here.
Mm-hmm.
We're quite broad across here. It's quite flared at the back of the mandible, and it's fairly squared at the front, which again looks like a masculine one.
Well, there's a damn great hole there, look.
It's intriguing, isn't it? Can I put my hand in, or will
Yeah,
I...
well, I reckon. Oh, you think?
I don't want to get bit.
There ain't nobody in there, is it?
I don't know yet. Ah!
Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to go fertling about in there too much,
No.
because if there's something in there that is undisturbed...
It's a sobering thought. If Phil's going to find a vault or shrine associated with King Anna, then this is the place. The archaeology is once again causing all sorts of headaches. At the West End, Matt still hasn't found a wall big enough to hold up a church. While at the East End, Phil's finding more holes, and they don't look much like a Saxon shrine.
There's another bally great void in there. I wonder whether we ain't got just big burrows. Whether that isn't what's creating our big hole down there.
This is more like Watership Down than Time Team, and Phil's probably got layers of demolition rubble to shift before he gets to any foundations. Whoever looted the stone from this old priory did a pretty thorough job.
The charters tell us that in around about 1300, there was no infirmary there. And with an infirmary, you would have an infirmary orchard.
But although we're struggling with the archaeology, we're still building up a fascinating picture of our priory.
We also have an inventory taken when the priory was dissolved, and it mentions a number of buildings. First of all, we have the religious ones. We've got the vestry mentioned, we've got the choir, we've got a chapel, but then we get mention of the kitchen, we get mention of the pantry, we get mention of the hall, we get mention of the parlour. These are the domestic activities of the priory. And then we get mention of a brew house.
Now, a brew house would be really, really fab, because I would like to brew.
It's the northern wall of the church.
Yeah, so that lines up pretty well.
We've confirmed the north wall of the Norman church, and the trench is producing a jumble of roof tile, medieval window glass, and the church floor. But if there was an Anglo-Saxon monastery here, you'd have thought we'd have also found some Anglo-Saxon stuff with a hole this deep. Unfortunately, there's not a hint, not a smidge so far. At least there's progress at the East End, where Phil's uncovered big foundations as well as human remains.
Yeah, that's a bit of pelvis there, and there's a bit of rib there. And then in here, look, no, I've got a whacking great leg bone, I think.
Yeah. These bones here are sat in this light, sandy-coloured material right at the base of here, on which this wall appears to stand, which means these bones are potentially earlier than the construction of the priory itself.
Because they're under the rubble platform which
Yeah.
was used to construct the priory. So
Exactly.
if you're finding Anglo-Saxon skulls here, the minster's back in the frame, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Since we arrived, Helen's always been convinced that King Anna's here somewhere.
So what are we likely to get here?
Well, we're going to have the east wall, the altar, and between the altar and the east wall is the classic place for shrines. So if we have King Anna here in the 12th century... because he could have been, bear with me, if we have King Anna here in the 12th century, he's likely to be here through the whole of the medieval period. So this is the place that he's most likely to be.
Look, I'm going to be happy if we get the east wall of the church.
Back inside the church, Kerry's cleaned up the foot of the pillar and it confirms this was an internal column, proving Bob's theory that the Priory Church had an aisle outside the nave.
A couple of days ago you said that they couldn't be columns because they'd be the size of Tewkesbury Abbey or something. Monstrously enormous.
It's big. It's a special building. It really is. It must be the best bit of 13th century in the region.
We can now see how much land King Henry I gave the Augustinians to found the priory.
I've tried to get outside it to try and understand the precinct within which...
And there was rather more to it than the ruins in Nick and Susan's back garden.
We've in fact only got a relatively small part of the site which is protected at the moment, pretty much just the core. And we're trying to really work out what the special archaeological interest of the site is.
Well, if I overlay my little coloured drawing of the top of the modern layout of the village.
From the old roads and boundaries, we can see how the priory site dominated the village and didn't include the parish church, which came later.
There's the church in the village, and that's where the priory is. They're two separate sites. So what we've got, in effect, is a precinct, which is all that area in there.
That's fantastic.
The Augustinians clearly had a large and powerful establishment here in Blythburgh, and Stuart suspects it could be situated on an earlier royal minster. And we've now found signs of earlier, possibly Saxon occupation in both Jackie's and Matt's trenches. In fact, Matt's got proof of several earlier buildings on this site.
Got over that side.
Well, just behind me there, I've got a glazed tile, which is identical to the one we've got next to that wall. So I know I've got that floor level.
Yeah.
But behind me, in the Victorian cut, we've got the same level, and below that, I've got an earlier floor, really substantial, and below that, an early post hole as well. So I've got stuff going down pretty deep.
So the post hole is sealed by 2 floor levels?
Yep.
All right.
This structure could potentially be the earliest settlement on the site, and with a stretch of the imagination, even the place where King Anna might have been brought after his death on the marshes.
Well, it all looks fairly sort of typical high medieval. It looks like Grimston were. They're making up in Norfolk near King's Lynn. That's exactly the sort of thing you'd expect to see used on the tables. Nice green glaze, nice sort of decoration on it. I mean, yeah, that fits perfectly.
Could this be evidence of the refectory or dining room Mick suspected was here?
You know, usage, more refractory.
Well, probably not. One pot doesn't make a refectory. Yes, there was a building here, but not the one we're looking for. If it had been part of the cloistral range, there would have been hundreds, even thousands of bodies laid to rest around here. So, after 3 days of searching, Mick has conceded that the cloister must have been on the north side.
It's most likely to be either Roman or Saxon.
And after a huge amount of work, John's mission to find the east end of the church has come to nothing. We couldn't recover enough material to be sure it was from the Priory Church, or for that matter, the earlier Saxon church.
It's an unusual stone type. It's not the same stone that we've got in the Priory.
But without digging here, we wouldn't have found this large, well-preserved male skeleton. It was buried with this amazing brooch, which dates the body to the late 13th century, when the priory was probably at its zenith. At the height of its power, the priory must have been an awe-inspiring place, a wealthy royal foundation and a focal point for pilgrims for hundreds of years. Radiocarbon analysis suggests the burials in Phil's Trench date to 930 AD. That means this man was buried 200 years before Henry I's priory was built on top of him. And in Jackie's Trench at the foot of the church, the bones date much further back to the mid-7th century. That's around the time that King Anna was killed. So we can safely say that we've looked the Saxons in the face. It looks as if their church was here on this site, even though it could have been destroyed in later Viking raids. As for the whereabouts of King Anna's tomb, that still remains a mystery. So even after this hugely frustrating dig with all its puzzles and dead ends, we can show Nick and Susan that an impressive Augustinian church ran across more than the full width of their garden, with a great tower held up by pillars towards the east end and a cloister to the north. Nick, you've been glued to this for ages now, haven't you?
Yes, it's fascinating.
I bet when we came here, you never thought you'd see all this.
No, it's been mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because, firstly, I didn't realise just how big the church was.
Yeah.
I just had no concept whatsoever.
You didn't even really know you got a church here,
Well,
did
I
you?
didn't. I had no idea whatsoever.
It doesn't bother you that we found all these skeletons?
No.
I've got a sneaking suspicion Susan absolutely adores it.
She does that.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.